something I think that when we explore who are Hispanics, we do want to look at not just who they are demographically, culturally, and also how they are spiritually and how we can connect with them, and the great need that we have to reach them. So there's a lot of research that I've done over the years that I put together, and this is the first time that I put it all together into one. So it may not be perfect, but it actually will give you a good understanding who are Hispanics, how they are culturally, what their needs are, the different types of Hispanics because they're not all the same, and how we can begin as a church and individually connect them with the church and share the gospel. So that's my hope. There's going to be a lot, and I would suggest that as we go, if you have any question, you can jot it down. I might just ask if you have a question. I don't know when, but if you really have a question that you want answered right away related to the topic, it's fine. We're a smaller group. My only concern is that I want to make sure that we get the whole picture of it. And also, when you're listening to this, is one question that should be in your mind is, what is my involvement? How can I be involved in this? If you're part of our church, then how can you be involved in the church? I am very certain that most of you have connections with Hispanics somewhere on a daily basis or somewhere along your work and even here in the church. So this is very helpful. I think it'll be very helpful for you to understand who Hispanics are. So I'll begin very briefly by telling you a little bit about who I am, because some of you don't know me. So I would call myself a Hispanic 1.5, and we'll talk about it later, but just keep that in mind. It's okay. No, you don't have to touch it. It'll turn off. I gave her the task of watching it, but it's working. So I was born in El Salvador, and I came to the U.S. as an immigrant. So when you talk about immigration and immigrants, which we probably won't talk about it because it's not my focus, but we'll hear some of the demographics. I came as an immigrant as well from El Salvador, and I came to California when I was about 10 years, almost 11 years old. I did not decide to come to this country. They brought me, so I can always shift the blame somewhere else if people say something about, oh, you came here. So, well, it wasn't my fault. Somebody brought me. So I came here, and obviously I was very impressed with America. And we coming from a small country that, a very rural, growing up, it was very different for me. It was a culture shock to me. And so we arrived in Santa Ana, California, which is Southern California. That's where we came. And I was just a young, we came there, but we lived in LA for a year. But it was in 1983 that I was invited, or my family was invited to a small, recently started Hispanic Baptist church. And it was there that for the first time I actually started attending church as a very nominal Catholic. My family never really went to church. I never went to a Christian church either. So this was my first experience in a Christian church. And it was there at the age of 13 when I came to know Christ. And I became involved in this church as a young person at the age of 14. At the age of 15, I was also involved in even preaching in this church, which grew to be perhaps one of the largest churches back then. I was involved in all types of leadership, and it was there where God called me to serve Him at a young age. I think it was 15 when God called me. So my whole goal in life was to serve Him, but I had a good opportunity to see how the church grew, how the church developed, and so I was involved in Hispanic ministry for a long time. It was there where I met my wife, and you'll meet her later. She'll give her testimony, and we got married, and so I felt called to the ministry and went to an undergrad school in Arizona for 2 years, and then went back. When I finished, I went back to California to try to get back into ministry, the church that I was part of, and I became involved in church planting for 6 years among immigrants, and that was a very difficult part too. So it's a very different demographic, but God used us as doing that, and after 6 years, I was pretty burned out, decided not to be in ministry anymore, and so I went into teaching. I had begun teaching before, but I just went into full-time teaching, and for 12 years, more than 12 years, I did that, and it was fun, but after that, the Lord prompted me to consider what I was doing. What was I going to do the rest of my life? And so, I started praying, and it took about 3-4 years before God sent us out, but I didn't even tell my wife that. I was just sending my resume all across the country, thinking, but here's the thing, here's an interesting thing. Being a Hispanic myself and growing up in the United States, now at that point I already was fully bilingual, obviously, and all my schooling here. And after being involved in ministry for 6 years, my thought was, okay, I think I've already done enough work with Hispanics. Now it's time to maybe work with someone else who's not Hispanic, or maybe it's just Hispanics who speak English. And so that was my kind of my thought, but God had different plans. And God always does that. So he led us to West, was a name guy with he has a different name too, but this is his name, Cabeza de Vaca, which means cow's head. It sounds cool in Spanish, but if you translate it, and it's terrible, right? In 1527, he came to the area of Florida. He got lost. There's a whole history of it. You can look him up, right? But he came, and he was actually a Spaniard. He came and traveled most of the Southwest. And as that happened, that in 1519, more or less, that's when the part of the conquering of all the Hispanic or the Spanish-speaking countries now, but Latin America started. And so as they came and conquered all that area, we get a new group of people because the Spaniards come, and a lot of were men who came to conquer. They didn't bring their wives, obviously. So you can think what happens next. So the Spanish starting getting involved with some of the natives as well. And a lot of times it was just to have kids because they were considered inferior, and that's it. So a lot of women who didn't have husbands because of that, but it gave rise to the mestizo people, right? A mestizo would be a person who is half Spanish and half native, or more so. So that would be me. I'm actually a mestizo. And some of our Hispanics here, they probably can tell you, oh yeah, I'm mestizo for sure. Right? And so that's what happened. So when that happened, not only that culture happened, but they brought Spanish to that area. And so the Spanish, especially the conquerors, they didn't, they had translated, and eventually some of the priests learned the languages, but their idea was, we want them to have our culture. And they built cities upon old cities, and they brought the Spanish language. And that's how we get Spanish all throughout Latin America. And that becomes the new predominant language there. And also religion changes, right? From being having their own religion to becoming Catholic. So Catholics started coming to the southwest of the United States in the late 1500s in what we now call Mexico. And then what happens afterwards? So that happens. After that, Protestants also come in the Southwest after the Declaration of Independence by Mexicans from Spain in 1824. That also brought some changes. So now we have Protestants going into the Southwest, sharing the gospel, right, with Hispanics or people that were Mexicans. Some of them have been living there all the time, and so that led to Mexican-American War. Have you heard of that before? And the United States actually wins that war, quote unquote. And a treaty is signed, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. In fact, there's a map right after of the conquest. But you see that that's when New Mexico, California, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, Nevada, Colorado become part of the United States, right? And if you ask a Mexican, like there's some of them here, like my wife is, and so is Miguel, they probably tell you, hey, yeah, they stole it from us. That's a lot of land used to be ours. Anyways, they might tell you that, so just be ready. And so that becomes part of the United States. Then a little bit later, in 1910, we have the Mexican Revolution. Now, why is that important? Because when that happens, a lot of people from Mexico start fleeing Mexico and coming to the United States. And a lot of them become part of the Southwest as well. So I'm giving very general movement, people of a Hispanic movement coming to the United States so you can get a picture. After that, in 1942, we have the Bracero program. 1942 to 1962, and that's when the United States makes a deal with Mexico, bringing people to do labor, especially in farming. So they got a work permit. They're able to come back and forth. They negotiate a wage as well. So they start coming, and a lot of people go back and forth. Again, this brings a lot of more Hispanics into the Southwest, including California. So you get more Hispanics coming here. And then in 1960s, 70s, and 80s, if you remember that, those of you who are old enough, I'm not that old, so I don't remember a lot of the stuff in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, but the Cubans experience, right, with going autocratic with Fidel Castro coming in and taking over. So what happens? A lot of Cubans start fleeing Cuba and come to America, and a lot of them land up in Florida. And so again, we get a migration of Hispanics, more Hispanics coming into the United States. And then in the 1980s, which is when I came, a lot of Central Americans start coming because of the war, Civil War in 1980. So we get a lot of Salvadorian Central Americans coming into the United States. And this is the time when I came. Now from here on, from the 1980s and on, and we see Hispanics continually come up to this point. Like statistically, we had known that immigration had kind of dwindled, but now the last 3 years, the opposite is happening. So we're getting a lot more. And this is not going to stop, in my opinion. The immigration is going to keep going. So we need to understand why God is doing this from that perspective and see what God wants us to do. So that's a kind of a general overview of who Hispanics are and how we got here. So now you can go all over the United States, not only the Southwest. Literally, you can go anywhere in the United States and find Hispanics. We've traveled to a few different states, and we always find them. It was like, oh, yeah, they're here too, right? And demographically, too, the Southwest are there. They're doing jobs in farming that nobody does. And so they are all over the United States, so you can't hide from them. And so that's why it's important to know what's our role as a church in reaching Hispanics. So now focusing more on what are some of the general economic and educational status of most Hispanics. About 18% of Hispanics were in poverty in the year 2021. That's a significant number. 56% of Hispanics, as far as education, had a high school diploma or less. So as you can see, there is a lot of issue with poverty. In fact, when I did my first church planning, most of those people were immigrants and were poor. And I can tell you, man, I walked into some of those homes and I was like shocked how they lived. Even as a Hispanic, I grew up like that, but I was probably a step up. They were a step down. I was also poor. We lived with 5-6 people in our home. I share a room with 3 of my sisters. I mean, that was common. And so when I went visiting this home, they was even worse than that. But the poverty is an issue. And educationally, they're also very low. In other words, not everyone is graduating from high school. Only about 20% of them end up earning a bachelor's degree. And about 69% of them had a high school education or less. So in other words, most Hispanics that come to America don't have that educational background. And the ones that are growing up here are struggling to become educated for various reasons. Now, here's the interesting thing, though, that I found out as well. Research suggests that Latinos who become Protestants actually move higher educationally and on income as well, and even rank. So that means the gospel does something to people, right? Transforms their lives, changes their lives, and they become a better person. So that is important to keep track. And by the way, you're probably asking, why I keep saying Hispanic? Isn't it Latino what he should be saying? We can get into a discussion of that, and nobody has the right answer. You can use Hispanic and Latino, and it doesn't matter. Both of them are not totally perfect. All of them have something that doesn't apply. Say Hispanics, well, we're not from Spain, yeah, but we speak Spanish, okay, but everybody speaks Spanish, yes, true. We're Latino from Latin, yes, our language, Spanish derives from Latin, but we're not Latin from the Romans, but we derive kind of some of our identity, so we're not really Latin either, Latin Americans. So anyways, there's no perfect word. I thought maybe if you call us mestizo, we'd probably have more people in there, but I'm not sure the Hispanics would like that. But so that's the case. So that's why I'm using that. But let me now turn into talking about some of the cultural distinctives of Hispanics, which I think are important for us to know. And the reason why they're important is because they'll help us understand them, who they are. And it is part of who we are in our identity. And some of these are not like, wow, like shocking revelation. They're very general, and there are not a lot of them. There are more than that, but I think it's important to understand those characteristics. And people consider this very important. In fact, in current research, we found with 20 different countries, they found that, for example, language is important for people, their own language. They consider it high in who they are in their identity. And to me, that's important. So when we talk about their cultural distinctions, it's important to know their language because they feel that that's part of who they are. And they value it. If you know how to speak their language, 91% of them said that that was very something that it was good to have that. And 81 of them said their traditions or their culture was important. So you know for Hispanics, the same thing. So language is important, but also their culture is important. But also a second reason that I think we need to understand their cultural distinctives is because if we're going to share the gospel, we need to know how they think, how they behave, how they are. And it's a very basic principle that we use, and as far as missions is concerned, anyone who's going to go to the mission field, they're taught this. They got to understand the culture before they're able to share the gospel with them. In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 to 23, Paul says this, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all that I may win more of them. To the Jews I became a Jew in order to win Jews. To those who are under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To the outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I may win the weak. I become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing." So the purpose of understanding people and their cultures and becoming involved with them is so that we can share the gospel. That's the whole point. So whatever we're learning today, the whole point is so that we can understand them better, so that we can share the gospel with them. And that's what Paul did. And it's a very basic principle. So how are Hispanics? Now, they're Hispanics here, so they can tell you yes or no. They're general traits. They're not meant to be like every single specific thing applies, but generally speaking, these are true. Now, you also might look at this and say, hey, this is part, like I know some other cultures, maybe some Asian culture will say, oh yeah, those fit in our culture. Well, it might be. They're not meant to be just for us, but this is some of the distinctives that we have as Hispanics. So let's look at the first one there. And the people that are Hispanic here, they can say, yeah, that's true, and they can kind of give you some perspective as well. The first one is that familia es familia, right? ¿Ya la han escuchado eso? Yeah, that's the all Hispanics say, yeah, see, you see. Family is family. So for Hispanics, family is kind of the basic unit, very basic. Now we all know that too for any in society. But here's the thing, for Hispanics, the individual is not as important as the family. And I know other cultures do that too, but that's for Hispanics. And the family may not be perfect, but they always have a saying familia es familia. My family is family. So they're expected to support each other. Children are expected to stay in the home, even after they marry. Hopefully they'll stay and live with the parents. The parents will buy a bigger house, right? And they'll live there. ¿Cierto? Yeah, they build on it and they want to keep their family together, right? Grandparents are very important in the family. And they often raise the grandchildren. I mean, in our case, we had grandmas help us raise our kids, at least the first two. During special events, we know that everybody's gathered together, family, grandparents, and especially in the grandparents' home or whoever has the biggest. And there's also plenty of time spending together socializing. So family is important. There's more that I could share, but just a very basic thing. Family is important. So what does that mean? And you're going to notice every time we discuss one of them, we'll say implications for the gospel. So what are some things that, knowing this, how can we understand them? How can we use them to share the gospel? Well, we need to understand that when we're sharing the gospel with them, we're not really going to individuals. We're going to families. And my friend Carlos is here too, and this is not true. When you go, you get one person, then you get a family, and the family is all involved. My family is all here, by the way, because we kind of do things together too. It's kind of like family. And so the implication is that we want to treat them as a family when we're sharing the gospel. It also means that because we're Hispanics, we also speak Spanish and English. And so we got to use both languages. And so you'll hear both. Younger generation, we'll talk about later, speak English, but we also have first generation who speak Spanish. Now, if you also want to learn how to share with them, you need to start attending some social functions with Hispanics. You got to go to those events. You got to go to those invitations that perhaps people offer you, and you're like, oh, I don't want to go. But also in the church, that's why we have social events. Often we're going to have our share meals here, or Dia de las Madres, which is coming up, Mother's Day, and we're going to gather together. But those are opportunities for you to connect with Hispanics, to get to know that social setting. And so those are great environments to connect with them so you're able to share the gospel in the future. And it's important that before you even are going to go and share the gospel, you got to earn their trust. Hispanics work that way. You can't just share the gospel and expect them to respond to you if you don't know them. You got to know them. You got to earn their trust. So that's the first one. Familia es familia. Are you all Hispanics here agree to that? Es verdad eso? Yes. Okay. So they're here. The second one is, you probably heard this before, mi casa es su casa. Right? And that deals with personalismo. I call it personalismo, or I'm not going to say it in English. It's there. And hospitality. But what it means is that being hospitable and being personal, it's important. And it runs opposite to our American culture, which is very individualistic. Right? In America, the individual is important, right? My thing is important. For Hispanics, no, it's our family, mi casa, right? Having more people. So that's important. Hispanics will even tend to adopt people who are not a part of the family. They become so close to them, they say, you're not part of the family. Right? So that's important. Hispanics like to meet people and spend time with them. And this is why we have a lot of fiestas. Right? You've heard of that, right? A lot of parties. Because we like to we want to socialize. And part of that, there's food, there's music, loud music, there's excitement. If you've never been there, you should connect with one of us. We'll take you along. We're also people that like to visit each other and doesn't require pre-scheduling. Now, they like to be spontaneous. And so for Americans, and because I'm 1.5, I'm kind of in the middle. I like it, I don't like it. It's kind of, but anyways, when I was younger, I remember one time I went to see our youth leader to his house. I just went without making an appointment. And so I remember that he told me, how come you didn't call me? You didn't tell me you were coming. And I was kind of, oh, why did he ask me that? I was like, for me it was a strange concept, because Hispanic culture, we don't ask for appointments. We just kind of show up at your door, right? Same thing in the office. Like if a Hispanic comes to my office here at the church, I mean, most of the time they're not gonna ask. Some of them learn and appoint, but there are people that just walk in. And so as a Hispanic, you can say, well, you didn't make an appointment, come back later. Don't do that. You just lost that person. Right? It's part of our culture. So that idea of being personal, of being hospitable, it's important. Other things that are important is when you connect with people and when you say hi to them, usually going to be by a handshake, a hug, or a kiss. Usually ladies do a kiss, if you haven't noticed. That happens a lot. We like that personal touch. right? Whereas in American culture, we don't. So, and I'm kind of divided many times. When I'm with Hispanics, I don't know how to, sometimes I'll kind of debate. My American mind debates with me and says, how should you act, right? Should you Hispanic or American? And so for my convenience, sometimes I use that. I use it and I want to act American, right? Since they already know that I'm kind of American. So, but Hispanics like to do that. They like to embrace people. And if you decide you're leaving, right, an event, you go around the whole room and say goodbye to everyone. You know that? So if anybody leaves today before the time's up, your job's going to go around and say bye to everyone, right? But that's what happens. For them, it's very, and if you leave without saying bye, you just wave your hands, you're rude. You are. They probably won't invite you again. But that's how are. Also, Hispanics are people of mañana, of tomorrow. What that means is that they procrastinate a lot, right? And everything's late. So it's a difficult concept for an American and even for me because we like punctuality. So as far as implications for gospel sharing, first, understand that Hispanics want to be treated like a person, not like a project, right? So if you're going to embrace them with the gospel, they want you to treat them as a person. You want to be a person that's friendly, approachable, and so you want to give that feeling to them. And if you give them that feeling, they'll listen to you. It's important to build relationships as well with them before you share their faith. And once you get involved in there, you're going to become part of a bigger network that you can also socialize with. Secondly, I think it's important that, as I mentioned before as well, is that attending social events is going to help build those relationships. And third, it is important to practice hospitality. It's important to you invite them to family events. It's important for you also to make them feel accepted. Now, what are the implications in a church? In the church. So even here as an American church, but anywhere, and Carlos is starting a brand new church. I know that if they're coming to his church, and it's right now it's growing, but you know what? They feel they come in, they feel like everybody loves them. It's a smaller thing, but they embrace them as friends, and they feel like, oh wow, this is a good place to be. So if we are not hospitable at church, they won't come. If our church, nobody says hi to them, they're not going to come. They just, as it is, it's difficult to take the next step in connecting with people from different cultures. So fartherless, a person who's not a believer is not going to come to church. And so often we have to kind of draw them into the church through social events, social environment, like Mother's Day, which we're doing in a couple of weeks. The whole idea is bringing people, connecting them with our church to see who we are and get to know us so that they can also come to feel comfortable coming to church. But it's difficult. We can't just go outside and say, come to the church and go, what? That's an American church. And that was one of our struggles in one of the previous churches that we worked. We got notice that people in the community, by the way, they'll share things in the community about the church, good or bad. And they used to share it, and they said, that's a gringo church. That's what we call us. We had a Hispanic ministry going on there. But they saw us as that. And so we're trying to figure out how we can connect with them and make them see that it's not. Because their reality was different, but the idea that they were given was that. So it is important to make sure that we practice hospitality with them. And it's important also in church that we provide time for socializing, which is so hard in American culture, isn't it? Especially in our church, we have 4 services. After first service, everybody's gone. I mean, it's like, previous church that we've been at, it was very interesting because we met at the same location, the same building, well, kind of the same big building. So we had an auditorium, and it had a lobby area on the very top, and then one on the bottom, and that's where we were, and we had a chapel. After the service, everybody left except, guess who? Us, Hispanics. We linger in that lobby for a while, socializing. And some Hispanics would some of the Americans would look at us and kind of wonder, man, why are these people staying, right? And we were like wondering, why are these people leaving so soon? But for Hispanics, it's important to socialize. It's important to have those connections. So it is important to give them an opportunity to socialize. The next characteristic is, aquí se habla español. Right? And you probably heard that before, right? It's the importance of Spanish. Now, why is it important for Hispanics? As we said, it is important for any culture. Their language is important, but it is part of their identity. Now, not speaking Spanish for a long time was considered something not very well taken by Hispanics. So if you didn't speak Spanish, you're part of the family, they would call you a gringo. Meaning you didn't speak, you were becoming something else, we're becoming American, not Hispanic. Now, it is changing a little bit. They still, 78% of Hispanics say that not speaking the language that speaking Spanish is not necessary to be Hispanic. So they're kind of changing the idea. You know why? Because second generations of kids are just speaking English now. And so they're kind of giving up on language is important. But it is something important that we need to consider. Spanish is not going to go away anytime soon. In fact, it's probably if I'm not mistaken, the third most spoken language, second or third most spoken language in the world. So it's not going anywhere. About 75% of Hispanics say that, or not say, but speak Spanish, and about 64 of them use Spanglish. If you've never heard that term, it's a mix of both, which I hate. And Spanish is considered the fourth, actually, largest speaking country. In the U.S. Spanish in the U.S. will be considered the fourth largest speaking language in the country. Now, here's the thing. It is estimated by 2060, the U.S. will be the world's second largest Spanish-speaking country. Isn't that amazing? It's like, wow. So Spanish is important. It is extension of the culture, as I said, is the mother tongue of Hispanics. So there are many grandparents who don't speak English, so they have to. In our case, our grandma doesn't speak English, so my daughter, who's here, she has to speak in Spanish with her. Right? And so there are other kids. I'll tell you a little secret about when you're bilingual in Spanish and English. I don't know if this is true with all Hispanics, but I think it is. Spanish is kind of a secret language for us. So we use Spanish a lot to communicate things that are personal, but we use English for fighting. It's just better. Spanish is, I don't know if that's true with the ones that are fully bilingual, but for us, we're fully bilingual, kind of do that. So English is good for fighting, but it's not Spanish. Spanish, we kind of reserve it for just normal things. Huh?
It's a lot easier to say worse things in Spanish than in another language. So in English, you have to think twice what you're going to say. So for us personally, we fight in English because you can say less hurting things.
Right. So yeah. So that's true. So there in Spanish we have a lot of vocabulary we can use, right? And so we don't, not bad vocabulary, but we have. And in English is limited sometimes to how we want to say it, so we have to think about it, right? That's the idea. Spanish is important to interact with family. We have what we call novelas in our culture, soap operas. I'll tell you, you may not speak English or Spanish completely, but Hispanics will watch a novela, man. You know why? Because they're all about the same thing. It's all about tragedies, love, and the poor. And so they repeat the same idea, just in a different way. And they're so popular. And people love that. And they last forever, by the way. So the other thing that where we see Spanish is in football, right? Soccer. Soccer is very important for people. So it is important. The news in Spanish is important as well. Listening to music in Spanish, right? Some of the genres are important, like mariachi in the Mexican culture is important. That's what we're having on Mother's Day, by the way. When you mention mariachi, people are like, yeah, I'm going to come. Because it's part of their culture, part of something very important. But I think as a Spanish, we continue to use Spanish, we see the second generation, as subsequent generations are going to become monolingual. And we're seeing it happening more and more, meaning that most Hispanics, second generation, are not speaking Spanish anymore. So what does that mean as far as sharing the gospel? It means that we need to start learning some Spanish to connect with them. If you don't know Spanish, learn something. It's important. It means that when we have services, we need to offer both languages, Spanish and English. And I often have this conversation with some of the pastors who have Spanish churches. So you need to have things in English for the younger generation. So a lot of Spanish churches, speaking Spanish, churches don't have anything in English. And I tell them that you probably need to have a service. So that's important, but we'll talk about it a little later. The next one is del corazón, which is passion from the heart. Hispanics are they're very passionate. And remember, we come from a branch that's called the Romance languages. So everything sounds more cool in Spanish when you talk about romance, right? And so are Italians and all that. But so we are we are people of the heart, if you want to say it that way. And from very early on, we are not just taught to be thinkers. In fact, that's not even encouraged as much, but to be passionate. We want to express ourselves with heart. So emotions are a natural part of our life. So in social settings, you'll see that we're talking very loud. And a lot of times we talk, we don't just listen to you and then we speak. We both speak at the same time. And I've seen Americans watch, I've tried this with Americans and they get frustrated with me because they're like, oh man, why are you interrupting? They think you're being rude, you're interrupting. But that's not with Hispanics. It's really cool. Try it. It's lively. We debate very lively. It's not passive. So it's when we are debating, we're talking about, so we're passionate. It's not offensive. It's actually encouraged because if you don't have a passion for something, it means you don't care. Now, nowhere can you see this more than in sports, especially soccer. It's like, are you kidding me? If you're not passionate about this, as Hispanic, I'm not, so just letting you know. But they love this. Or same thing with the soap operas that I talk about. Strong emotions and drama appeals to Hispanics. And so it's important that we know that we're people of the heart. Now, how do Americans tend to see this? And here's where it's problematic. A lot of them think that we are just kind of intolerant or too emotional or pushy. But it's not the case. We're people of the heart. And so that's also how I preach most of the time. I've learned kind of keep balance. I could be more, but I'm not typical, but I'm not totally the way you would expect an American to be. I kind of found a middle ground, but you have to be passionate. And sometimes people go, well, he's just a little bit too passionate. But same thing with Hispanics. If you see a person that's not passionate, especially a preacher, you're going to go, oh, I don't want to listen to him because it has no passion. They don't like listening to somebody for amount of time. By the way, it's more than 30 minutes for them. You got to give them an hour. I mean, they like an hour-long sermon. And I hear that in Cuba, if you don't preach an hour, you're not a good preacher. That's what I heard from a Cuban told me. So you got to preach at least an hour, which is interesting, right? So that's an implication for reaching. It also means that when you're sharing Christ with a Hispanic, you really got to show them with your heart that this is your life. They can't see it in you. They can't connect with you. They're not going to believe what you say. So that's important. It's really interesting because there was this lady that worked in one of the churches that we were doing ministry who's Hispanic, and we had to connect with our communications director to have a meeting. And so this guy was passionless. So we met with this guy, and she was very passionate. She was like, man, going, and the guy just sat like this. No expressions. It was so hard for her. And afterwards, she didn't say anything, but afterwards she said, why doesn't he show any emotion? I mean, it was like, what's wrong? And I just had to explain to her, this is part of the American culture. Sometimes you don't show any emotion. This guy was totally more than you would expect, right? He just showed no emotion. You can't. So Hispanics want to read you, right? And so if they can't read you, they have a problem. So that's why you show passion, you show movement, you show that you're listening. If you don't show that, they think you have no interest in them. And so it's really hard. Am I right? Are you Hispanics right with that? Yeah, right? And so they'll get more pushy. They'll try to get a response from you, and this guy would not give a response. And so she actually was very worried. The next one, and I'm going to try to wrap it up before the break, barriga llena, corazón contento. We say that, right? Full belly, happy heart. It's kind of a translation. We love food. Now, a lot of people love food, but a lot of it, I have to tell you, goes back, especially in people that come a background where they have been poor. Food becomes something that's part of understanding that you are satisfied and you're happy. So we grew up poor, so and our moms in particular, when we went to eat with them, and even now, they just give you food, a lot of food, so much food, and you got to eat a lot. But for them, is having food, abundance is the opposite of how we used to live in poverty. And so food is very important, right? And there's always plenty of food and leftovers. If you don't have leftovers, then you're probably not Hispanic. And it's funny because it happens to us, even Hispanics. Sometimes we've gone to places, right, and like Americans potlucks, and nothing is left, and we're like, well, man, we sure miss our Hispanic potlucks, because those things, man, you take food home, right? There's plenty of food. There's always tortillas there, right? A lot of them. I know Colombians don't eat tortilla, but they do arepas. So food is important. It's a sign of good health. It may be changing now, but I know that my mom used to look at people who were skinny and thought they were not healthy. But if you were, is that right, Christina? Is that true? But if you are kind of chubby, they call you hermosa. My mom used to go, oh, you're so beautiful. And you kind of go, wow. Because really, the idea of being well fed and having some meat around you is health to you. You're doing well. And so that is important. Hispanics also, if you visited their homes and they'll offer you food, you're part of it. They always have an expression, ven a comer, come and eat. And I often did that as a young person going to the youth pastor's home. They would invite me, come over and eat. We're eating. Right? It's hospitality, but it's also food is important. Now, why is this important when sharing the gospel? Because if this is important to them, that means that the best way to share the gospel is using food. So you want to go eat with them. Now, let me tell you something though. El que invita paga. And that's something that is important. You know what I said? If you invite, you pay. Whoever invites pays. Hispanics, even if you don't say it, when we go out, isn't that right, Carlos? Whenever we go, it's que invita paga, right? Now, Americans, it's not like that. And we've gone, it's so weird. When you go to an American, you don't even know, oh, okay. They invite you and you go and they're like, oh, okay, everybody's paying their own thing. You go, okay, wait a minute, he invited me. I was like, why did he invite me then? You know, because you're expecting to be, and you can pay next time. You can say, next time I'll pay if they pay. And that's kind of how it works. But yes, people want to be invited to eat together, but you also want, if you invite, then you want to make sure that you pay for them. In church, obviously, food is important, so that's why we do share meals or potluck, as you call them. I just don't like the word potlucks. It doesn't mean anything, right? But we call share meals, and we have those often. So every social event that we have, we'll have food. It's important for us. Now, you say, why is food important for that? Is there any relevance? Well, food in the Bible is important. You know that in the Lord's Supper, that was a meal, right? Converted into some form of a remembrance for Jesus, but that was a whole meal. part of the meal was the Lord's Supper. And we also know that in the kingdom of God, what's going to happen? There's going to be food. Why are we having food if we don't need food? Because it's important, because it'll be part of who we are. And so food is not trivial, it's part of the gospel. And so if we really want to reach Hispanics, I think we need to learn and understand that. I think that's where we're stopping point, correct? Look at our schedule. I told them to keep track. Okay, so we'll take a break, and then we'll come back with the next part.